Hey guys, this is part three of Unit 6.1's Flipped Classroom. If you haven't watched parts 1 and 2 yet, then you need to stop, back up, and go watch parts 1 and 2 first. This should be the final part of this PowerPoint. Okay, so we left off, and we had wrapped up the Missouri Compromise, remember that, okay? And we're moving on to the Wilmot Proviso. This is also FYI, you don't have to write this down, but listen up so you know. Okay, so over time, after the Missouri Compromise had happened, we end up going into the Mexican-American War, right? We win, we get the Mexican Cession Land, which remember makes up most of what we now consider the Southwest United States. It gave us California and Nevada and Arizona and New Mexico and that big old chunk of land, right? With some other states or parts of states in the Southwest, okay? Once that happened, hey, we have all this new territory. What are we going to do with it? Is it going to be a slave state? Is it going to be a free state? How are we going to break this territory up? And so, of course, the North was afraid it would become slave territory, and the South was afraid it would become free territory. And so both sides tried to do things to get it to be the way they want it to be. And so there was a guy named David Wilmot, who's over there in the picture, okay? And he introduces a bill into Congress that would have banned slavery in all of the Mexican Cession territory that we had won from the Mexican-American War. He said this territory did not exist for the U.S. when the Missouri Compromise had been written, so this shouldn't apply, right? This is newly found territory. We need to ban slavery in this area. Of course, the South was ticked off. They don't want slavery banned at all, much less, an even part of it or all of it. And so the Southern members of Congress, who agreed with the Southern viewpoint of pro-slavery, stopped the bill from passing. So the Wilmot Proviso does not pass. It is not guaranteed that there will not be slavery in the Mexican Cession lands. Okay, well, now what? Okay, so here's a map of what I'm talking about, just so you know. So that striped land there is the Wilmot Proviso territory. That's the Mexican Cession land, right? And we're saying, hey, let's make it all no slaves. But the South comes in and makes sure that bill does not pass. So the Wilmot Proviso does not pass. But again, these are all things making national headlines that are building tension, guys, between the North and the South. Things like Nat Turner's Rebellion making headlines, the Wilmot Proviso making headlines. All these little things are building up the pressure in the pot before it's going to boil over. Okay? All right, so here's our next question. Q6, California, free or slave? Write it down, highlight it yellow, okay, on the right-hand side of your notes. So in California, as you probably recall, we had a gold rush. Okay, gold was discovered in 1848 at Sutter's Mill, kind of like around the San Francisco area. And by 1849, you had a slew of people with gold fever coming into California and populating the area called the 49ers, right? All the miners and business people coming over to service the miners looking for gold. And so they request statehood because they've got enough people living in California's territory at that point to become a state. They want to come in as a free state. But if they come in as a free state, again, we're in the same problem we were back in the 1820s with the Missouri Compromise of unequal Congress, right? So every time a new state wants in, it creates, headaches about trying to maintain balance of power. All right, the Missouri Compromise rules, do they apply? Do they not apply? We didn't own this land when the Missouri Compromise rules were, put through. It's decided that no, they apply to the Louisiana Purchase territory, but we didn't own the Mexican Cession land yet. So, well, now what? California wants it in a free state. Do we let them in or not? Okay, so keep that in mind. Highlight, highlight, highlight. Left-hand side question. Draw a line underneath everything you just wrote. And moving on to the next slide, Q7. Compromise of 1850. Here's another thing that's going to add pressure to that boiling pot, guys, because here's the thing about compromise. You get a little of what you want, and the other person gets a little of what they want, but neither one of them are totally happy, right? That's what a compromise is. You get a little bit, but you're also giving a little bit. So this is going to put a seal on that pot for a little while longer, but it's going to also be building up tension because of the outcome of this compromise. So the South has started discussing leaving the Union. Remember, the Union is the United States of America, guys. You will hear that word a lot, Union. That is the USA. So the South is talking about walking away from America, walking away from the Union, if we let California in as a free state. Henry Clay, great compromiser. You've heard him with compromises before. Here he is at it again. He comes up with another compromise with the goal of keeping the Union together. Everyone, North and South, recognize they're stronger as a power and a foreign body in the world politic arena if we stay together, okay? So Henry Clay, in an effort to compromise, says, hey, how about this? And he creates the Compromise of 1850, which has a couple of different bullet points about it. Step one, okay, keep this straight. Hint, hint, wink, wink. You need to know this. Okay. Step one, California is admitted as a free state. Yay, California. We are free from day one. Woo, woo. Okay. All right. So California is free. That's part one of the Missouri or the Compromise of 1850. All right. Part two. Well, that's not all the Mexican cession land. There's still other pieces of the Mexican cession land. So we're going to divide that up into two territories, Utah and New Mexico territories. Okay, and those territories, Utah Territory and New Mexico Territory, can use popular sovereignty, which means voting. The people who live there can vote to decide for themselves if they want slavery in that territory. Okay, so California is going to be a state and we're going to be free. And the rest of the land will be divided into two territories, not states yet, two territories. And the people who live in those territories can vote. Okay? So if you didn't yet, draw a line under that, give yourself a left-hand side question, but we're not actually done with the Compromise of 1850 because it continues on question 8. So write Q8, Fugitive Slave Act, highlighted yellow, all right? And this continues on with the Compromise of 1850, all right? The next part, so California's free, rest of the territory divided, and they can use popular sovereignty or voting to decide if they want to be slave or free, okay? Third part, to throw Southern people who are pro-slavery a bone, because California did get to come in as a free state, okay, so to give the South something, part of the compromise stated that, hey, if you know of an escaped slave, because remember, the Underground Railroad's going, abolitionists are helping people to escape, slaves would try running away on their own and stuff. So there were at any given time dozens or hundreds or maybe even thousands in some points in history of escaped slaves out there in the world, okay? You had to report it under penalty of prison and fines and Southern people outside of the law coming down and, hunting you down and beating you up and stuff. So if you knew where an escaped slave was, you had to report it. And what you would do is there were people who were hired as slave catchers by the South. Okay, so they kind of like bounty hunters, like Dog the Bounty Hunter. All right, so these slave catchers would go run after runaway slaves, catch them, and then they would take the slave to a special commission and plead their case. This is slave so-and-so, they belong to plantation whatnot, and they ran away on such and such a date, and I found them here, and, they're supposed to be a slave, we should return them. Okay, here's the deal with the commissions, guys. Get this. This is like super twisted. Not cool. All right, the commission was paid $5 if they chose to release the captured person. You know what, slave catcher? I don't think you have enough evidence. We can't tell if this person's really an escaped slave. We're going to let them go. Sir, ma'am, you can be on your way. Peace out. You got $5 if you did that. But if the commission decided that the person, yes, they are a fugitive slave, yes, the slave catcher's claim is valid and obviously they belong on plantation so-and-so to person what's a nut, then they got $10, okay? So $5 if we let them go, $10 if we say, hey, yeah, no, they're a slave. So guess what happened 99.9% of the time? Even free slaves or free African Americans who truly had bought their freedom papers and, were free, got put back into slavery if they got caught. So even free African Americans had to be on high alert because of this. Okay. Another part of the Compromise of 1850 is that they banned the slave trade in the nation's capital. Okay, so Washington, D.C., right? No more slave auctions or slave trading happening in the capital. All right, so the Compromise of 1850 kind of has four pieces. California becomes a free state. The rest of the Mexican cessions divided into two territories that each get to vote or use popular sovereignty, voting, right, to decide if they want to be slave or free. If you knew of an enslaved person, you had to report it under penalty of jail time and a fine, right? That was called the Fugitive Slave Act. That is why the title of slide 8 is Fugitive Slave Act, okay? Because reporting it and going through that process with slave catchers and the commission and reporting it if you knew of a runaway person is the Fugitive Slave Act, all right? And part 4, we're banning slave trade in Washington, D.C., okay? Despite the fact that the South gets some wins here and the North gets some wins here, the South didn't get it all their way. It wasn't their way or the highway. They're ticked, they're outraged, and they pretty much refuse to enforce any of the laws that didn't benefit them from the compromise. Okay. All right. Draw a line, highlight, highlight, left-hand side question. If you're not ready, push pause because here we go. Of course, I got some video clips for you. Check those out. Pick and choose, guys. You want to watch a few of them from this episode. Breaking it down for you in some picture form. Compromise of 1850. California is a free state. Abolish the slave trade in Washington, D.C. Stronger fugitive slave laws. You know of a runaway slave? You gotta report it. Fugitive slave law, okay? And popular sovereignty. Hey, we're going to let you vote if we're slave or free in new territories that we are claiming as a country. So here's before. And then California gets to come in as a free area. And then we divided the rest of it for the time into Utah and New Mexico. And they both got to vote on what they wanted to do. Okay. There it is again in another map form. Take a look at that. Take it in. Notice the slave states, the blue ones, okay? This is going to play a role in the Civil War. Those are slave states, all right? And then, of course, your green territory are your free states, okay? So keep that in mind. All right, last question for this PowerPoint, guys. Q9, John C. Calhoun, crazy hairdo, reminds me of Albert Einstein every time, okay? So he's a senator from South Carolina pro-slave, okay? So that's where he's coming from with that idea. He's been open the entire time to the South seceding, vocab word there, okay? To secede means to leave the Union. Remember, Union is the United States. So the South still thinking about leaving America, pretty much is what it's saying, okay? John C. Calhoun was a big advocate of being against the federal tariff taxes. They thought really and truly it only benefited the North. It's a crock that the South should have to suffer while the North is getting all these, you know, railroad tracks and, you know, upgrades to factories and roads put in and all this stuff. And the South really wasn't. They were kind of getting the short end of the stick there. It's true. And so John C. Calhoun became a big believer in states' rights. Okay, guys? Understand that term, states' rights. States' rights are the idea that an individual state has the right to declare a federal law unconstitutional. We've studied this, we've talked about it, you know darn well that's actually not true under the US Constitution. But John C. Calhoun's thought process was, if we all voluntarily became states within the United States of America, we should be able to voluntarily leave if we want to, or not follow certain laws of the Constitution if we don't want to. So John C. Calhoun really starts getting a lot of traction and press about the idea of states' rights, and the South is eating it up like watching a movie and eating popcorn, guys. Okay, they're all about like, yeah, that makes sense. If we don't want to follow a law, we shouldn't have to. We voluntarily became, you know, part of America. We should voluntarily be able to follow these laws or not follow these laws. And so that becomes the state rights argument that a lot of the South is going to spout on about. And he did not like that Compromise of 1850. All right, so draw yourself a question and highlight, 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 all that stuff. Okay, so for the moment, even though there's people, things going on and press happening with states' rights and stuff, and the pot is starting to get to the top, the crisis is averted with the Compromise of 1850 for now. But, you know, we might be friends today with this compromise. In 10 years' time, we ain't going to be friends no more. We're going to break up and it's going to be sad.